This is a video overview since we don't have class this week for the, the because of the holiday. So, chapter 3, here we go. It's focused on culture. So, first we should think about what is culture. And, defining culture is easy. How to define it, how to identify it, maybe less so. But we think of culture, sociologists, we think of culture as um, the way that a group of people live. You could almost think of it as a blueprint for how to live within a society. If you don't know what a blueprint is, or you can maybe think of it as a design, a blueprint is essentially a design that architects draw that tells the contractors how to construct the building. And so a blueprint or a design for living is what culture is. It tells us how to live within a particular culture. In fact, if you think about it, if you don't know the culture of a place that's very different from, let's say, a non-Westernized country, you might have quite a bit of difficulty navigating that part of that culture because you don't know what the norms are, you don't know what the values are, which we'll talk about in a bit. And one thing to consider about culture is that it does shape us. It does influence how we think, not only about the people around us, but also in a larger context about the world around us. And culture is not something that is ingrained, it's learned. It's not biological, it's something we learn. And we can learn any culture just simply by being immersed in that culture and being willing um, So I want to focus on ethnocentrism, ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Ethnocentrism first, because this is the easy one. Ethnocentrism, we see it all around us. It is the belief that your culture, the way that you live, is the standard by which everyone else should be judged. It's how you evaluate every other group, every other country, every other culture, which may then lead us to be intolerant, may lead us to be hateful, even. Um, it may lead us to think of ourselves as superior to people who come from a different culture. And ethnocentrism can give us a sense of pride about our group, um, but it also can have that downside of preventing us from recognizing the merit or the beauty even of other places and other cultures. And so ethnocentrism sometimes can lead to prejudice and as I said, perhaps even hostility and hatred. Cultural relativism. Cultural relativism, a little bit more difficult to understand because we don't necessarily think, you don't necessarily think like a sociologist, but for sociologists, we think of cultural relativism because it is the ability to try to understand other cultures, other groups, on their terms, not on ours. That is, we are not judging them based upon what we do and how we are, who we are, but we're judging them based upon their group standards, their group norms, their group values, which does take work sometimes to stop ourselves from immediately judging another group based upon our own standards and really seeking to understand how and why these other groups may do things differently from ourselves. But in the end, it helps us to be more objective. It helps us to be less unaccepting, to be less tolerant, to have less hostility, and hopefully to be less hateful. Uh, so, two parts of culture, material culture and non-material culture. Material culture is everything that's around us. It's everything that humans create, they make, they use. And so the buildings, the furniture that we use, the cars we drive, the tech we use, the clothes we wear, the institutions that we've created, the schools, the educational institutions, the healthcare systems, all of that, that's material culture. And of course, most of us would agree that these things typically serve a purpose. That's why humans created that part of culture. Non-material culture is more difficult to identify for most people who are not trained sociologists. Non-material culture is associated with ideas, beliefs, values, assumptions, opinions. These are not things that we can necessarily see and touch, but they're important to us nonetheless. So consider um, one type of belief that is common throughout the world, present in every culture that we know, and that's religion. Now, ancient peoples, of course, were um, polytheistic. They believed in multiple gods. And over time, humans switched to believing in only one God. So we're not polytheistic anymore. We're monotheistic. At least most major religions are. All that I can think of. So when we think about that belief of religion, consider that there isn't really any proof of the existence of a God. However, there are many people who point to the evidence that there is a God. So they point to things such as the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Bible or this gospel or that gospel, or they might point to the Quran or some other types of religious texts. So really what it comes down to is you either believe in a religion or you don't. It's something that is unique to all of us, whether we choose to believe or we choose not to believe. There's no right or wrong here. Of course, values, those are things that I'll talk about more in a bit, but those are things that also you either have certain ideas that these things are important or you don't. You either have certain ideas and opinions or you don't. These are things that, here's an example of non-material culture. The belief in freedom. Say in the United States, do we believe in freedom? Freedom of choice, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, etc. But what does freedom really mean? If you ask people who are living in poverty, they might say they don't really have a whole lot of freedom. If you ask somebody who's a multi-billionaire, they may say that their ability to do things is virtually unlimited. For example, when Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, was running for office the first time back in 2016, he famously said that he could pretty much get away with anything. In fact, he said, I could probably stand in the middle of Times Square and shoot somebody and nothing would happen to me. And so this sense he has had then, and I think probably still has, that I can do anything as a wealthy person and nothing is going to happen to me. Um, those types of values or opinions or ideas. So the other types of non-material culture are signs. So we don't always communicate using language. Sometimes we use signs. We have the flag, that's a symbol. We have stop signs. Those are symbols. Yeah, it has a word, but it's just simple too. Traffic lights, red, green, and yellow. Those colors mean something. That's what to do when we're driving a car and we come up to one. We also, bathroom signs, the blue circle with one figure or the other. We have the walk signs, the hand or the little guy walking, all of these are symbols and they tell us something. It's a way that we communicate within our culture. Gestures too are part of how we communicate. So we might wave at somebody, we might flip somebody off, we might wave somebody over, we might give somebody the okay sign or the thumbs up, we might frown at someone, we might smile at someone, and depending upon the situation, it may mean these gestures may mean one thing or the other. I'm sure that we've all had the experience where we ask somebody what's wrong and the person says, nothing's wrong, but the expression on their face tells us that something is wrong. Or somebody smiles at us and we don't really feel that it's a genuine smile versus when, maybe we're the favorite grandchild and grandma or grandpa smiles at us, we feel that's a genuine smile. So all of these are ways that we communicate and all of these are part of our culture. All right, so I want to get to values and norms because it's important that you understand the connection between values and norms. Values are socially shared ideas about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, um, whether we should do something or not do something. Those are values. So, as I said earlier, we say we value freedom in the United States. We say that we value justice. We say that we value um, guns or Second Amendment right. We say that we value education. We say that we value due process in the criminal justice system. So we have all of these ideas that we say are important to us, that we think are good or we think are bad. And norms are rules or guidelines that tell us how we should act, tell us what kind of behavior is acceptable and appropriate in certain social settings, in certain social environments. And so they're connected in this way. We typically come up with a value and then norms that reflect what we have said is important to us. So let's just take education. In the United States, we say education is important for society. So what do? Well, the norms, the things that we do, are several. One, the federal government requires all states to have operating public school systems. All right, if a state is having financial difficulties and they want to save money on in their next budgetary year, no state can say, well, we're just going to close all the schools for this year and then maybe we'll open them back again next year. They could try doing that, but what they would find then is the federal government would cut off all other funding to them because states receive a lot of funding for not just education, but also infrastructure, housing, all these other things. The United States government would just say, okay, well, you're violating the law, so we're just going to cut off all the funding. You don't want to open schools, then you don't get money for anything else. Probably no state would try doing that. We also not only require public schools in every state, we also require that these be public school systems, meaning that they are free to everyone. Doesn't matter what your social class is or what your gender, any of these things. They're free for everyone by taxpayers. We also make them compulsory, meaning we force you to go to school so that even if your parents have to take you kicking and screaming to school every day, you have to go. There's no choice. You have to go until you reach a certain age, 16 in California, 14 in some other states, mostly Southern. That's one example. Give me one more. Something we value. We say we value justice. Say we value justice. So what do? Well, in the criminal justice system, we have the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, and the Eighth Amendment. These are amendments. These things were added to the Constitution because it was clear that the criminal justice system wasn't always fair, wasn't always just to everyone. And so what we see is in the Fourth Amendment, we have a right against unreasonable search and seizures in our homes. We also see that through the Fifth Amendment, we have the right against self-incrimination. We can't be forced to say something that might get us in trouble. We have the Sixth Amendment rights. Those Sixth Amendment rights are that we have a right to an attorney, that if we can't afford one, we will be provided one. We have a right to a jury trial if we want one. We have a right to a transcript of the trial in case we want to file an appeal. That'll come in handy. We have, let's see what else under the Sixth Amendment. I think that's good. And then in the Eighth Amendment, we have a right to, we have a right to be free from cruel and unusual punishment. And so we can't be waterboarded, we can't be tortured, none of these things can be allowed in the system because of the value we have and the norms, the laws that we created, the behaviors that we have created that say, hey, this is important to us, so this reflects what we said is important. I hope that is clear to you. And then I want to focus on I want to focus on subcultures because when I was talking earlier about subcultures, I was talking about, or culture, I was talking about dominant culture, the culture that's the broad, overarching culture that most people live with, most people are a part of. But there are also subcultures, and subcultures are groups within society that are different in some way. They may have something distinctive about them, whether it's maybe some values, some norms, lifestyle, perhaps. So a subculture might be one based on ethnicity or age or interest or anything else. Right? So here are some subcultures that maybe some of you are part of. An ethnic group, or maybe you're part of, so you're an athlete of one sport or another. Maybe you are somebody who likes to skateboard, so you're part of the skating culture, the skater culture, or maybe you're somebody who who likes anime, so you're part of that subculture, or maybe you're somebody who um, is a gamer, so you're part of that subculture, or maybe you're someone who I'm trying to think of other subcultures here. Religion is a subculture too, because not everybody belongs to the same religion. So maybe you're part of a religious subculture. You start, I think, I hope, to get the idea that there can be subcultures based on any number of interests or characteristics that we have. A counterculture is a group that is considered to be openly or actively opposing the views of society. And I'm not sure, well, okay, here's one. Um, I'm not sure it's the best example, but I'll give it and you can decide whether or not you agree that this is an example of a subculture. There are militia groups in the United States, and militia groups have the stance that the laws of the United States don't necessarily apply to them. Some of these militia groups are actively trained what might be called paramilitary exercises. And many militia members are former military, former, people who were veterans, people who were in the military at one point, and now they use their skills to help train others in these militia groups who were not necessarily ever part of the military, but teach them and train them to use firearms and other tactics that they learned in the military. And so the Oath Keepers is one of those militia groups in the United States. You may know them from their involvement with January 6th and breaching the Capitol building on January 6th. Proud Boys is another group that is considered to be a militia group, at least by the Department of Justice in the United States. And they also were part of what happened in terms of breaching the Capitol building on January 6th. Again, some people might disagree that they're counterculture groups, but I give those as an example because there aren't a whole lot that exist in the United States, as you might find in other countries. Cultural diffusion and cultural leveling and cultural imperialism. Okay, so first off, cultural diffusion. Cultural diffusion is the idea that start to have this spread of culture from one place where it originates to other places. And one could argue that we see cultural diffusion of Western culture to other places, to the rest of the world. So for example, I was recently traveling outside the United States and in Greece and France and Italy for a month this past summer. And everywhere that I went, I saw American fast food chains, I heard American music, and I saw American stores. Everything from Nike to Foot Locker to H&M is actually British, but it was there too. To I'm trying to think of other American, Under Armour, all the athletic companies you can think of, Nike, etc. Um, so much of American culture is now part of these other countries. And even if you go to uh, places years ago, 2001 or two, I think it was, I was in Africa. I went 2 summers, 2001 and 2002, on safaris in Africa, not the expensive kind, the cheap kind where you camp outside, put up your own tent. But everywhere I went, I heard American music. I was in Botswana and Malawi and South Africa and Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, Kenya. And I recall a particular instance when I was in Malawi, which is a small country. Um, it's bordered by Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Tanzania. It's not that large at all. We were camping by a lake. The group I was with was camping by a lake. And after we put up our tents, and the group that was supposed to be cooking dinners decided, okay, we're going to start cooking dinner. The rest of us saw there was a little bar on the beach and decided to walk over and grab a beer. And as we walked up to it, I remember hearing the song that was popular that summer and thought to myself, wow, I can't believe I'm in this African country in the middle of nowhere on, you know, at a lake, at a little lakeside bar. And here's the song I heard, Wasn't Me by Shaggy. And I thought, I leave the United States to experience something different, and yet often I find that American culture has followed me. So cultural diffusion, right? It's spreading rapidly from one culture to other parts. And I would argue that American culture probably is more diffused than any other culture. We don't, yeah, there's a little bit of maybe European culture here. Maybe, I don't know, some artists, European artists make it big here in the United States, U2 and I don't know what recent ones do. Um, but when it comes to the music and the fashion and the movies, that is all American. We don't really have a whole lot of Italian fashions here, except for people who are really into the world of high fashion, where it's very expensive. Um, Cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism is this idea that there's an imposition or a forcing of one's cultural beliefs on others, and that this is done either through, advertising and exposure, through media, regular media, but also social media. But it becomes such that people want to have these consumer and other products, because of the belief that's been imposed on them, that this other culture is better. And again, I'd argue that given what I've seen in the 60 plus countries I've traveled to, people seem to have come to this conclusion that American products, American music, American movies are better than their own. And again, I think this is largely through the social media, the advertising, the marketing of these American companies, and in some instances, just buying the competitor of that country. Years ago, I was in Peru, and again, I'm in a country I like to. I'm a vegan, so I can't try things like cuy, which is guinea pig, commonly eaten in Peru. But I like to try the things that I can. So I was in a restaurant, and I was asked what I would like to drink, and I asked, well, what's a typical Peruvian soda? And I was told Inca Kola. And by the way, you can find it some places here in the U.S. and Latinx restaurants and stores. Inca Kola. So I thought, okay, well, I'll try the Inca Kola. It was pretty good. It kind of tastes like a cream soda, I thought. And so when the waiter came back and brought my food, he asked me how I liked it, and I said, oh, I think it's really good. It tastes like cream soda a bit. And I said, I'm glad that there's at least something left of the Peruvian culture. Right? And he laughed and he said, well, not really. And I said, but you just told me this is a typical Peruvian drink. And he said, yes, but Inca Cola was bought out by, take a look at the label, take a look at the side of the can. So I looked at the side of the can, and sure enough, it had been bought by Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola had bought Inca Cola because it was the soda that local people drank. Since they could not compete, they simply bought it. And now they make money with foreigners who drink Coca-Cola and the locals, people who live there in Peru, who drink Inca. So,